My name is John Mitchell. I'm a product manager for Intrepid Control Systems. In this video, I will be providing an overview of a new feature available in our VSpy software starting in VSpy version 3.9.23, which is scheduled to be released in February of 2026. This new feature allows users to use our post-processing tool called DataSpy to view signal data in real time while online with VSpy. So here I have an instance of VSpy with a platform loaded that has a bunch of customer shareable fabricated signals for use in these types of training videos. And so I'm going to start by running a simulation with a fabricated file. And you'll see I have about 20 messages here in the messages view of DataSpy. And so I can click on the plus here to expand to see the signals that are below each message. So here's engine speed. So I can right click on this engine speed and then plot the signal in DataSpy. And it will launch the DataSpy application. And it's a separate application, but we have a interface with the two applications so they can share data with each other. And so the one signalized on DataSpy engine speed, it shows up in the channels list of DataSpy. So you can double click on that signal and it'll add it to the plot window. And notice that the first timestamp here is of the signal in DataSpy is the time since the second since I went online, in VSpy, with the simulation. And so you can see engine speed is scrolling along here. You can turn on the grid lines, and once it fills the screen, it'll start to scroll. And by default, the plot window is 100 seconds wide, so you can change that time width. But it just it streams engine speed back and forth. And so if I go back to VSpy, I can pause the messages view to get it to stop updating in case I want to look at some data that is in messages view. I can study that data here. I can turn off scroll mode or turn back on so you could analyze the data, right? So in a similar fashion, even when VSpy is paused, it's still streaming data to DataSpy. So the simulation is still running. If the logger is continuing to monitor the network traffic, it'll still stream that traffic over to DataSpy, and I can resume playback in VSpy by checking the pause button. So in a similar way in DataSpy, if the user scrolls left in time to analyze some data that they see in the plot window, zoom in or out and time or the y-axis, it'll pause the playback in DataSpy so you can look at the legend and you can analyze the data. And then if you want to resume playback, there's this button here at the top that you hit this to resume the playback, and it'll plot all the data that was buffering while you're in pause mode. So this pause playback is similar to the VSpy pause button in messages view. And so down here at the bottom, you can tell that when DataSpy is in streaming mode because it says data streaming from VSpy. So normally when you're using DataSpy in a post-processing method, it'll show you the file name that's down here, which I'll be switching to that in a moment here. And so now let's go back to VSpy and let's add a few more signals. So let's add pedal position and propulsion torque request and vehicle speed and propulsion torque actual. And if you look at the signal list, all the signals that the signal list tab, which is available in the measurements window, it shows you all the signals that VSpy is streaming to DataSpy. And this is kind of left over from how the signal plot feature works. All the signals you're plotting in real time are in a signal group. So that still exists in VSpy, except we have a dedicated signal group called DataSpy Monitor Group to show you those signals. And so another thing to notice in DataSpy, while you're streaming data in VSpy, you're not allowed to load configuration files here. The load config DataSpy config button is grayed out here at the top. And so if I go back to Vehicle Spy messages view and I go offline, now you've got the buffer full of data that was, streamed to the messages view while I was online. And then if I click on this DataSpy button, it'll make an MF4 file for all the data that's in the review buffer of Vehicle Spy. And then it will send that MF4 file over to DataSpy. So now you can see all of these signals here in the channels list. These are all the signals that were set up for decoding in my Vehicle Spy platform. So, and if I go back to the start of the file, you can see the signals plotted, from that point in time. And so you can also click and drag, signals on the plot window here, and arrange them, But what you can also do while you're offline is you can load a configuration file. So click on this button, and in this context, this is a DataSpy configuration file, which has the DSC extension. So if I load that DataSpy configuration button, it loads my previously developed config with all my signals plotted in their colors and their axes and all that. And so now, if I go back to Vehicle Spy and I look at my channels list, it still has just those 5 signals that I had previously added. But if I go online now in Vehicle Spy, DataSpy will automatically take all the signals that are in the plot window, and it'll send a request to Vehicle Spy to add those to my my real-time DataSpy plot. And so if I go back here, you can see in my channels list, my signal list, I have more signals in there. So many of you who've been using DataSpy for post-processing, you may have a collection of those DataSpy config files. And so you can use those config files to set up your live streaming sessions without having to recreate them. So, one of the big goals of designing this interface was to allow our users to seamlessly move between post-processing and real-time processing. And by the way, you can also use your DataSpy configurations to analyze data that's uploaded to the cloud. DataSpy also runs on our wireless neoVI server, and all of your config files that you made for post-process / real-time analysis, you can also use on our cloud server. So the last feature I wanted to show you about this setup is if I go offline here and I save my VS3 zip or my VS3 file to some new name like just video script version 2, and I save that, Vehicle Spy will save that DataSpy was a DataSpy session was connected to Vehicle Spy, and it'll also save the configuration in DataSpy to the VS3 or VS3 zip file in Vehicle Spy. So if I close down Vehicle Spy, and then if I relaunch Vehicle Spy and I open that VS3 zip file, it remembers all the signals that I had plotted in their colors and their axes. So then if I go back to Vehicle Spy and I start streaming data, it'll just stream all the data, right to my setup that I had here. And if you have multiple screens, it's great to have it set up on a separate screen. If you're, but oftentimes when you're looking at data real time in the vehicle, you may only have one. But either way, it works well. So that concludes this quick overview. It's a new feature. There's, I'm sure there's some issues and some features that some of you folks would like to see in it, and we're taking requests. So again, my name is John Mitchell. I'm the product manager for the DataSpy tool. My email address is jmitchell@intrepidcs.com. You could feel free to send me an email with any questions or features you want to see in this awesome tool. Thank you.